historic actions that they were proposing. And basically, I read up on my market updates from Asia overnight, like literally every couple of minutes from my bed. And this was just the type of attention that was needed, this level of attention when we're living in an environment where the financial system remains very fragile. And to me, I think the hours do not bother me at all. I really don't view it as a sacrifice. I don't have kids yet or a family, so I can say that without impunity, but I think that sort of the hours are the easy part. I think the tough part comes when you have to make really tough value decisions. As a public policy maker, you're always faced with choices. There are several good choices, several bad choices, politically bad choices, politically good choices, and then there's also the substance of the issue that you need to evaluate. And I think that's the tough part of the job. I think the hours are sort of, they come with the terrain.
I want to come back. Karen raised the question of the lack of Asian Americans on the federal bench. And one of the questions from the audience was, what's going on at the White House? There's probably some lawyers in the room. What's going on at the White House now on the Supreme Court vacancy? Maybe some of you would like to apply, and if you are lawyers in the room, and you're interested in serving on the Supreme Court, Chris might be available to take your resume back. But what is going on in terms of how is the president thinking about this, particularly on the question of he made a statement yesterday. Who's got the action? How are you going to select people? And then I'd like to ask Karen, given the fact that lack of any Asian Americans on the Court of Appeals, only 8 in the district courts, I want to put you on the spot and throw out some names of people that the president should consider to put on the Supreme Court. Not on the Court of Appeals, but on the Supreme Court. Chris?
Well, I mean, John, you said it exactly. The president made a statement yesterday following Justice Souter's announcement of his resignation, where he basically said, look, I want somebody who obviously understands the law, but I want somebody who has an empathy for the problems of real people. The president has always said, look, 95% of the problems that are facing judges, most people would decide the same way. It's that 5% that he wants to see literally what is in the heart of the judge and how they're going to make their decisions. We have a unique president. I mean, that we've had presidents that were lawyers before. I don't know that we've had that with a law professor before, and who could have, in his own right, have been a remarkable judge himself. So he, has been thinking about this, knowing that this was a possibility. I don't know that we understood it would be this soon, but this is something he's been thinking about. He will be intimately involved in the decision, and I understand. It is the diversity of the court, or the lack of diversity of the court, is going to be a very important issue to him. In addition to finding somebody who reflects the values that he believes the law ought to reflect. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, as you might imagine, both the conservative and the progressive communities are organizing feverishly for battle on this important nomination. We don't think it'll be the only opening that the president will have, but clearly it's an important first opportunity to shape the court. And we've been talking about not just diversity in terms of race and gender, but also diversity in terms of experience. One of the things that's happened over the last several years is, if you look at the fairly newly appointed judges over the last 8 years, largely former U.S. attorneys, prosecutors, coming from big corporate law firms, not really people coming from public defenders, people coming from representing labor unions, people coming from civil rights backgrounds. So that's one of the issues, is when we look at diversity, it's not just race and ethnicity that we think it's important. We also think it's important that the Supreme Court and all the courts have a mix of experiences, because it really does matter. That's one of the things I learned when I clerked for my Ninth Circuit Court judge was, you can say that the law is even and people need to be balanced, but you bring yourself into the room as a judge or as an attorney. That shapes what you think is, for example, reasonable or not reasonable for someone to do because of your cultural background. You might have a different take on that. So that's very important. There is one name that is most prominent in terms of a potential Supreme Court nominee, and that's Harold Koh. He's currently going through confirmation to be basically the State Department's general counsel, legal counsel, to head up all the attorneys in the State Department. Right now, he just had his confirmation hearing. It's been a bit of a battle because some of the more crazy conservatives have, gone out on radio and on Fox News, for example. But he's supported by people like Ken Starr, who's hardly known as, wild-eyed liberal. So,
I can attest to that.
yes. So, Harold brings, he's currently dean of Yale Law School. He brings impeccable credentials. And I think one of the things that he would add is a more international human rights background to the bench. Right now, there's actually a debate going on in Congress and in the legal profession about the extent to which the U.S. should look at the treaties that we signed, that we should look at what courts around the world are doing in terms of looking at what basic human rights should be in the U.S., and there's been a lot of pushback on that point. Now, Harold is very much believes and is committed to the U.S. Constitution and doesn't think international law should supersede the Constitution, but he does believe that you should look at the best thinking that exists, whether it's in this country or other countries, and the U.S. is no longer supreme in legal thinking. And so I think that he would bring an incredible viewpoint. We also have some women who have served very honorably on some state Supreme Courts, who we think also should be considered. It's not necessary that someone goes to the Supreme Court from the circuit court. They've come from state courts. They've come from legal law schools. So we do think that we, in the Asian community, we will be working hard to get some candidates thoughtfully, seriously considered, and we'll see what happens.
John, if I could just add one thing, and John and I have been part of these conversations going back to last summer, was then candidate Barack Obama, where when we started talking about the transition, basically charged us with finding an administration that reflected the diversity of this country. And he told us very expressly he did not want an administration of people who were just inside the Beltway, or people that had federal experience. He wanted people who had state experience, local experience, had experience in the private sector, gender diversity, racial diversity, private experience. And for too long, the debate, whether it's in judges or in other picks, is that you can either have the best candidate or you can have a diverse candidate. You can have the best thing. And I think if you look at a couple of the choices that John was intimately involved in, whether it was Steve Chu or Eric Shinseki, you put a Nobel laureate in physics head of your energy department, you can't imagine a better choice than that. With Eric Shinseki, you put a 4-star decorated general heading your Veterans Administration. Those are an important sign that it's not you're just filling this with an Asian slot or African American slot. You're finding the best candidate, and often that best candidate is a minority candidate.
Very good point. I'm going to switch from law back to finance, Julie. There's a question from the audience. People are still concerned that financial professionalism isn't sufficient in the Congress. That's because they're all lawyers up there. How many people with financial backgrounds are there in the Senate right now? And do you feel there are enough there? And there's also a substantive question, if you would like to speak to it, which is that critics think the U.S. hasn't done enough to clean out banks' toxic assets. Do you agree with that opinion, and do you think that the administration is on the right path? But start with the Capitol Hill. Are there enough people with the kind of financial background that's necessary to kind of wind our way through this current crisis?
Well, I think like any profession, and Chris and Karen were just speaking about the types of backgrounds they look for when filling justice or legal positions. I think the same philosophy should guide filling any type of public policy position. And unfortunately, the diversity of backgrounds